support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Wells Fargo, the Narit Foundation, Walmart.org, JP Morgan Chase, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch just a couple polls to step back, see how everyone in the room is doing today. This first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? How are you feeling about your business? Give it a couple more moments for folks to respond here. Thank you, thank you. All right. Awesome. I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, it looks like optimism coming up in the lead. Always great to see, but definitely have some feelings of anxiety and a little bit surviving. So super confident that our conversation today may help address some of those feelings and worries that you may be having. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch the second one. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just helps us understand your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can make sure the programs and resources in the works are continue to be relevant to all of you. So give that one just a few moments. Awesome. We got folks from DC metro area, Oklahoma, Houston, Texas, Mississippi, Chicago, Illinois, Portland, Oregon. Welcome, welcome. So great to have you all joining. Awesome. I'll give it just one more moment here. Alabama, welcome, welcome. Nigeria, awesome. Cincinnati, Ohio. Alaska. Oh, wow. We have folks from really all over the place. Super exciting. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, it looks like finance coming up in the lead. Definitely relevant to our conversation today, but we have needs all across the board here. So thank you all so much for sharing. This is super helpful, and I'm going to stop sharing this poll, and without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Erin Wade, author of The Mac Cheese Millionaire, Building a Better Business by Thinking Outside the Box, now available. So thank you so much for joining, Erin. Super excited to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So before we jump right into the conversation, do you want to maybe give just, like 30 to 60 seconds on who you are and, what's kind of brought you to this conversation today?
Sure. So actually just this week, my sort of business and leadership book released, which is called The Mac Cheese Millionaire. And it is a pretty non-traditional business book in that it's funny and it's a bit cross between sort of memoir and leadership and business tools. And what brought me to this moment, or what brought me to write it, is that really I had been working as a corporate attorney who sort of dreamed of opening a restaurant and did end up leaving it all behind. But I'd say to open that restaurant. And so I opened Homeroom, a mac and cheese restaurant in Oakland, California. And it has become wildly successful, has been, everywhere from the Wall Street Journal to the Cooking Channel. Our financials are in like the top 1% of restaurants, and our employee tenure is 10 times the national average. So really proud of what we've done. But really, a lot of the concepts in the book that I'm most proud of is I sort of went on this personal journey figuring out, hey, why don't I like work? I didn't like my work as a lawyer. I didn't like other jobs I'd had. And I really wanted to create this amazing place, this amazing business that would be successful, but also a really incredible place to work, and sort of through trial and error, figure that out, like tried to create the place I wish I had worked, but it just had not up to that point. So I tried to make those tools available to other people so they don't have to go on their own like decades long odyssey to figure out how to, build a better mousetrap. And that's why I'm here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so powerful. And I know many entrepreneurs, are doing the work that they are doing because they also kind of have experienced, a problem or a gap and
Mhm.
they see a better way. And so that I think that resonates so much with founders across, industries here with us today. And I'm so curious just to kick us off, from that journey that you kind of embarked on to discover a better way to work. Um, what are some of the core principles that you identified, especially when it comes to kind of your leadership style or your leadership strategy,
Mhm.
that entrepreneurs may value, to learn from that experience and those core principles that really drive long-term success.
Sure. So, the three things I identify are, collaboration, communication, and collective success. And I do feel like those words on their own could sound like buzzwords that maybe don't mean anything, but I'm happy to walk you through examples of what each of those things are. I'd say also pretty like universally, the sort of philosophy that I think also is sort of driving everything in those three areas is how do you create the right systems and structures that really allow people to be themselves, but allows the business to be cohesive and mean something? So, an analogy I use is that of like a coloring book. Like, the reason why a lot of workplaces really, suck is honestly, you're being handed a paint by number, right? You're being told this is what you need to do. Everyone's paint by number is going to look exactly the same. There's very little creativity there. Um, at first was very reactionary to that and swung the pendulum in the other direction. I was like, here's your blank sheet of paper. And people really didn't know what to do. And the company was a bit of a disaster in the early days because I wasn't giving people enough direction.
Mm.
And so I think that actually the art and the science of leadership really happens to, be what I would call the coloring book, which is, a coloring book has the outlines within which people get to express their own creativity. So everyone's coloring book, the imagery is going to be the same, but it's going to look different because you're going to fill in the lines with whatever color and sort of life you want to bring to it. And so that's sort of an animating principle of a lot of different things I do. What is the right system and structure within which people get to really be free?
I think that's so interesting, really. Um, you know, uh, Focusing more on kind of the lived experience of those you're looking to serve and how it can be improved through the work that you do. And really making that like a core focus of your decision making machine or mindset, if you will. So
Sure.
uh, yeah, that's super powerful. And I, 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 I wonder, specifically from your experience, homeroom is like very successful in the sense of you were able to foster like a really feminist and people-centered environment. And something that you talk about in the book is that this can kind of be done regardless of gender. And so what was your experience like building that type of company culture from a team perspective and also, from a customer service perspective and some of the critical elements of that leadership style that made the work that you do, increased the impact and outcomes that you were had set as objectives for yourself.
Yeah. So, as you were mentioning, I think the book does have it. I mean, I do have a pretty strong, sort of feminine lens and perspective, but with the goal of it being advantageous to people of all genders. It's not just for women, but, what I found was really missing. I think the best way I can explain it is through a sports analogy, honestly.
Yeah.
So, I am a big surfer and surfing is really a lot like business in many ways. it's historically a very male-dominated sport. The rules of the, road were sort of come up by men a long time ago. And today, much like the Fortune 500, it's, mostly, men that are playing sort of the top of the game. And the rules of surfing are very winner take all. So if a wave comes, the first person on it gets it all to themselves, right? So it's very competitive, it's very ruthless, it's very winner take all. Nothing wrong with that. But for a lot of people, that's, maybe not the most fun reason to get into the water, and so I had this experience a number of years ago where I went to this beach that was actually it was all women in the water, which had never happened to me before. And I got in, no one knew each other, but all of a sudden, it was like the rules of the sport had been really turned on their head. And all of a sudden, everyone was communicating. So instead of competing for the waves, we just started taking turns. We started communicating. We started celebrating each other's successes. And, when I reflected on that experience, I was like, this is, I think, actually the real, like, beautiful competitive advantage that I think women can bring, and plenty of men, but that I think, women can bring to the workplace. And so that story is sort of like the guiding principle for how, I would run things, which is that we were always looking for that kind of communication, collaboration, and collective success, as opposed to, individual success, ruthlessness, cutthroat. I really wanted it to look like, that surfing day.
Yeah. I feel like that's such a great example in the sense of like, demonstrating, how representation in leadership can really be, foster natural innovation. You're suddenly in a space where there are women you kind of all working together, as leaders to kind of create a different experience, for that sport. And that may not, be achieved otherwise. And so I think that just really goes to show that natural innovation that can occur with, that shift in mindset and that shift in leadership style. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And to my point, and I think also, but it is a leadership style that I think appeals to plenty of people, and I think it's just a perspective that we haven't had as much in business just because there aren't a lot of women at the, very tippity top. So I think, anyway, it was just a perspective was excited to present, and I think, appeals to lots of people, not just women.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful. So, and I know we have some founders here, many who are solopreneurs, maybe wearing every hat. But a lot of them are kind of on a trajectory towards, establishing a team. Maybe they already have a small team and it's growing. Um,
Mhm.
so one challenge that we hear so often is around employee retention. And so can you talk a little bit about what your journey looked like in terms of fostering a culture and a business model that really lends itself to team, individual growth among team members, and what steps can entrepreneurs take early on to establish a culture that supports that whole individual as part of your team?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I was really proud. Average tenure in the restaurant industry is incredibly low. It's like less than 90 days. Our average tenure was 2.5 years. So, I think there's a lot that people can do to engage people that is not being done. And I think certainly if, I was able to do it with, often very entry level labor, not at a high, rate of pay relative to lots of other industries, then I do think that these ideas can work almost anywhere. Um, I would say, sort of back to those three C's, the communication, collaboration, collective success. I think they need to like truly not be buzzwords. So I'd say in terms of collaboration, one of the biggest ways that I would collaborate with my team is that we were an open book company. So would share financials with the team, teach really basic financial literacy, and have a meeting every week where everyone was managers were required to attend, but any staff would be paid to attend. And we would go through basically a mini like P&L meeting every week and different people would report on different numbers and tell the story behind it. And, business is, I mean, I guess back to another sports analogy, really, it's just like a sport. The only difference is that instead of going for goals, you're going for dollars and other things, that you care about. But and it would be crazy. You would never play a game without ever sharing, with your team how you're doing. That would just be odd to try to, but that is how most businesses are run. So I think, sharing information, truly collaborating with people, making them responsible for getting some of that information, for talking about it, for improving it, really creates like a culture of engagement, of personal responsibility, and of enthusiasm. And then, part of being open book is you do, you share part of the success. If you think you're going to, try to watch a certain number and improve it by whatever it is, $10,000 that year, share $1,000 of it with your team. You'll still be $9,000 richer. So I think, not just engaging people, but then also having them participate in the success of the business.
Yes, I love that that I feel like that's so important, especially, like bringing it back to that like third key element of like collective success. And something that, entrepreneurs struggle with a lot is especially during like periods of low demand or just
Mhm.
times of uncertainty, how to, continue to foster a sense of ownership and motivation across the company, across team roles.
Mhm.
So, and kind of what the balance looks like there. And, I know, as many entrepreneurs expressed in that poll at the beginning, finances is top of mind. And
Mhm.
so kind of where do you find the balance between decision making in alignment with strategic financial goals and continuing to, foster that sense of innovation and momentum among team members, and their own kind of ability to impact, those that your business serves?
Yeah, so we would use a decision-making structure that I call collective success, which is really where every like, even major or minor decisions were made through this lens of what is going to create the greatest success for the, greatest number of stakeholders, basically. So whenever we had a decision, we would look at it through what is the impact on the employees, what is the impact on the customer and the community, and what is the impact on the company.
Mhm.
And the goal of the exercise would be to maximize the positive impact on all of the stakeholders. And I think that that was really helpful because that sort of balances, I think my experience in leadership is a lot of times, decisions are made just based on whoever has the most power or is the loudest voice in the room. And you'll often get a lot of pushback because other people's perspectives maybe aren't represented or uh, and it can be really hard. And the thing that I love about this is that it gives you a framework for everyone within an organization to understand why decisions are made and to understand, hey, if you want to help have a different decision be made, then you're going to have to explain it through this sort of, framework. So, I have an example of this, like we were so when suggestions, for instance, are brought by staff, like we had a number of servers who we had language on our menu. We had a service charge that was distributed among staff, but people could leave an extra tip. And the servers wanted the language on the menu changed because they thought that the guests would leave larger tips if that was true. And I was like, all right, well, I need you to explain it to me through this lens of collective success. So, what would be the impact on the employees? And they're like, well, we as servers would be, we'd be super happy. We're going to make more tips. And I was like, great. Well, what do you think is going to happen to the rest of the staff? What about the folks in the kitchen? And these servers recognize they're like, oh yeah, I guess the kitchen doesn't get to participate in tips, so they won't actually make more money. And I was like, oh, and how much money do they make relative to how much money you presently make? And they're like, oh, I guess they make less than us. And I was like, all right, so, what do you think that's going to do to employee morale? And they're like, oh, okay, I guess that's a little bit, a little thorny, right? So then we
Yeah.
move to the guest and it's like, hey, how's this going to impact the customer? And it's like, oh, I guess they're going to pay more for their their food, because they're going to leave a bigger tip. So we're like, okay, it's, hard to see how that's of a benefit, to them unless they really feel like maybe they're underpaying or like we're underpaying our staff or something. And then, last is like, how about the company? And they're like, well, I guess if the staff is, if like half of the staff is disgruntled, that, they're making less and the customer is paying more, like, yeah, it's probably not going to be the most long-term sustainable decision for the company. So they basically talk themselves out of their own idea. You know what I'm saying? And it was this really powerful moment for me because, usually in a leadership role, like I'd have to be the one to say, hey, we're not going to do this. And then people would be angry and they'd be annoyed and they would still fight back. And but when you have that collective success framework where everyone knows like, hey, we really do have to make decisions that are good for everyone, it allows you to make better decisions, but also to have a lot less pushback and to really engage people in helping see what the right decisions are and the reasons why.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like that was such a great example and also just kind of shows the power of like scenario planning, like
Mhm.
really thinking about like how would events proceed after making certain decisions and what is the impact of that on all different stakeholders is really important across like business functions.
Sure.
So such a great example there. And I know, just to kind of go off of this conversation, like there's a lot of entrepreneurs that have, are in this kind of position of looking to strengthen their leadership style and cultures in this way. And the one of the other elements that you had mentioned early on was collaboration.
Mhm.
And so I would love to hear, just about some of the, key, moments from your entrepreneurial journey in which team collaboration really led to, the kinds of innovation and uh, uh, you know, product service development, whatever it may be, that really drives greater impact, and what lessons can entrepreneurs learn from those experiences that you had?
Sure. So, I think one of the most basic ways is, we were really obsessed with communication and collaboration. And so, like I said, we do these open book meetings that were once a week and track a bunch of metrics, but we'd also require staff actually at the end of each shift to fill out a basic form where they'd put suggestions. They would actually rate, sort of how well we were doing on our mission as it related to guests, as it related to their own experience. And, so we're getting just, hundreds of data points a day, basically. And of those suggestions, what you find is you just have incremental improvement over time, such that, like our first year in business, I mean, we operated out of like a shoebox like space. We were doing, 1.6 million in business, and 7 years later, we're doing 7 million in business. I mean, that's a huge leap out of a tiny space. And honestly, it was just based on our increased efficiency year over year, based on like implementing a number of small, tiny incremental improvements that were suggested by staff. So I think these kind of things, like really having genuine open lines of communication and, getting like input from the experts, which are people who are on the ground day to day, figuring out how to make things better, it does add up to make a gigantic difference over time.
Yes, absolutely. And I know like in a lot of conversations we have across topics in these community classes, customer feedback and that kind of information is always emphasized as being very important. And the same goes for your team members. That's really where you're going to identify those gaps and opportunities for improvement, is
Mhm.
listening to those people, doing the work that you may not be doing, as whether you're the CEO, COO, whatever your role may be. If you have that team support, really understanding what it looks like from their perspective. So thank you so much for emphasizing that. And, I think it kind of, that point lends itself to, this, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, it can be difficult to understand how effective the established company culture
Mhm.
really is on your team, and the the momentum that they have, the outcomes that they are working towards. Um,
Mhm.
and so from your experience, what are some signals or indicators that entrepreneurs can maybe focus on that would indicate that, the culture and the culture that they've built for their company as it aligns with their business model is really positively impacting both team dynamics and customer outcomes and maybe even stakeholder outcomes. And of course it's going to look different for
Mhm.
that right company culture is going to look different for every business, but I guess kind of like some across industry, what are some kind of like key signals that something maybe isn't working?
Well, I think that that's actually why this open book stuff is so valuable because a lot of us are measuring things, honestly, that are only on a financial statement and we're looking at it maybe once a month. And
Yeah.
so I think picking out whatever matters for your own business and looking at it every week, I mean, that is part of the practice of open book management. Um, but again, involving as many people as possible in looking at that information and reporting on it and talking about it, because it can't all be resting on your shoulders, and you're not going to get as good outcomes if it's all resting on the shoulders of a very few people. So, um, yeah, I think finding ways to measure even things that might seem hard to measure, like our mission was to be the best part of people's day. So we'd ask customers that to leave it on their receipts. Were we meeting that goal and what are the primary reasons why or why not? We'd ask that of staff every day. And I think a lot of businesses, if they get that kind of information, they maybe do it like once a year. They'll do like, an employee survey. They'll do a big customer service survey, But I think we were doing that every week. And I think it makes a huge difference because when something starts to get off track, and you can
Yeah.
solve it a lot faster if you're doing this kind of stuff annually. I really don't see how you can be on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, such an important point is really make like this is such a it's a never ending like continuous learning uh
Mhm.
feedback loop if you
Yeah,
so that learning process never really ends and finding how to kind of implement it more frequently and regularly within your daily business processes as a leader is just so key to figure out early on, so love
totally.
that. And I think just to go off of that, we've talked a lot about what strategies for, people-driven leadership, especially for entrepreneurs here who may have small teams or growing teams. And
Mhm.
for those entrepreneurs in the audience who may be solopreneurs and are maybe on the trajectory,
Mhm.
they're kind of in that growth stage or
Mhm.
that growth phase and are maybe looking to expand and have, the capacity for a team or a small team. What are, some just tips or strategies for cultivating that, perfect fit team in a way that both will strengthen the culture that you've kind of already built as a solopreneur, but also kind of contribute to business performance measures.
Yeah, well, I joke in the book. I have a chapter on like why hiring is like dating, and I think that's very accurate. And the reason I think they're similar is that hiring, for some reason, we have this practice where we'll hold an interview and we'll talk to someone and we'll assume that that will bear any relationship on what it's like to work with them. And it's not really true. I think what you can get from an interview is, for sure if you like really don't like this person, right? But you're not gonna know, I think much like a date, like you're not gonna know what this person is like in a relationship. Similarly, you're not gonna know what it's like to be in a working relationship with someone that you interview. All you're gonna know is how well do they speak to you? How
Yeah.
articulate are they? And that's a very specific, skill set that may or may not be applicable to their actual job, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I found that early on I would make a lot of mistakes where, I would hire for people basically that made me feel comfortable or that I found interesting. And that was a huge, huge mistake. Like I needed to be hiring for people who were going to be great at the job that they were being hired to do. So we started working a lot more towards how how can I have you basically do a, you know, a short version of whatever that job is. So if someone was going to work in the kitchen, we would pay them to do a shift in the kitchen working with our folks. So we could actually see, like, do they have the skills to do this? How well do they work on a team? How well do they collaborate with people? You know, are they a good fit? And when I would have people applying for, you know, more managerial or office jobs, I would same pay them for a project that we were going to do anyway, to have a sense of like, how do they approach it? Are they organized? How do they collaborate with people? You know, are they going to get it done on time? And, you know, because a lot of people are great talkers, but not necessarily great doers. And so I'd say don't fall, you know, prey to the trap of charisma. You know, really when you're bringing people on, have the job interview be as close as possible to what it is to do that job.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know there are many entrepreneurs that are coming from a kind of corporate lifestyle, trying to make the transition and
Mhm.
maybe familiar with, many different industries have, those kinds of job, like kind of like test run throughs. And so it's definitely an interesting and more pointed way to gather information about, potential team members to really find that right fit. So love that strategy. And, kind of on the other end of the scale for those businesses that, are growing at a fast pace, maybe they have teams of more than 10 or even greater,
Mhm.
it can be difficult to maintain culture as that team really grows so much larger. And so from your experience, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs on kind of preserving those core values as the company grows?
Yeah, so I found, you know, I mean, I scaled our team from 14, well, I guess really just from me to 14 to when we opened to 100 at the time that I sold the company. And what I found was really important was being able to articulate the values very clearly, to teach about what they are, and then to hire for them, to train for them, and to promote for them.
Mm.
And honestly, a lot of places the values like live on a wall and they don't really mean anything, because if you're just good at the technical parts of the job, you'll be promoted no matter what, right? Doesn't And so we felt like actually in our job evaluations, only 25% was based on the technical components of your job, and the rest of the 75 was based on how well are you contributing to these company values, right?
Hmm.
So are you able to how good is, you know, how much of a team player and like collaborator are you, you know,
Yeah.
how much are you really approaching, you know, work with this eye towards collective success. And if people aren't doing that, they just weren't a good fit for us. They wouldn't get promoted, or they wouldn't, you know, even make it past their first 90-day evaluation. And so I think being pretty, you know, militant about that and actually holding to it, even if you have a high performer, if that person is, you know, if they're technically a high performer, but then, you know, a jerk to work with, like not letting that become your culture,
Hmm.
but really standing for something and sticking by it.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And we actually had like somebody who submitted a question during
Mhm.
registration that I feel like kind of, gets at this idea of like, where how do you kind of find the balance, in communicating these values
Mhm.
across the team, like, the balance between kind of like maintaining empathy and really trying to resonate with the most amount of people, but still
Mhm.
kind of being consistent and clear in kind of your execution of what these values really are and
Mhm.
how individuals need to show up. So kind of, finding that balance of like, we we want you to come here and this is a place where you can be yourself, but these
Mhm.
are also what uh kind of our expectations are, in order to drive those outcomes that we've established.
Sure. Yeah.
Wonderful. And, I think this can really be relevant, across whether you're a solopreneur or you have a small team or maybe you have a larger team. during we kind of touched on this a little bit early on, but didn't really dive in. And there right now we're living in times of uncertainty, and market dynamics are volatile, and they're depending on what industry you're in, you may be experiencing like seasonal like low demand periods, or whatever it may be. Based on, of course, there are a lot of challenges that are like unique to the restaurant industry. But so from your perspective, what are some of the kind of like crisis leadership strategies that you implemented to guide your team through these kinds of challenging times, while still staying true to this framework of people-driven leadership?
I mean, I think that when you hit challenging times, having these kind of structures that focus on, collaboration, communication, and collective success become more important than ever, honestly. So I think the fact that we had structures and systems in place for, bringing in and promoting the right people, for tracking the right kind of information, for having ways to like improve and innovate, for handling discipline and problems, like I think these are all the things that become, even more critical when the stakes are very high or when things are not perhaps going the way you'd like them to be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, as we're kind of leading into our live Q&A portion, I think that kind of goes back to just, really establishing these kinds of leadership systems in place early on.
Mhm.
And so, for those just starting out, based on your journey, what are the most crucial leadership principles that entrepreneurs should really focus on early on to build that resilient, people-centered company that they aspire for?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost is honestly like having, a product that really resonates with your customer and that is the best thing it can possibly be. I mean, to me, that is the foundation upon which everything else is built, or you will not have the luxury of being a great place to work or anything
Yeah.
else. So, I mean, we haven't talked about it that much thus far, but I mean, that was really critical for me was like, our mac and cheese was going to be the best that anyone had ever had, hands down. And our service experience and the value that people were going to get when they came in, the goal was to really be providing like the design and service experience that I had seen working in fine dining previously, but making it very approachable and casual so that the value of the food and the experience was just exceptional. I
Right.
mean, without that, I wouldn't have had the luxury of having a big team to work with or having any team, right? If you're not speaking to your guest or your customer, and you don't have a product that people want to buy. So
Right.
I'd say first and foremost, make sure you have a product that people want to buy and,
Yeah.
figure that piece out first. And then from that place, you can then have the luxury of being like, okay, now how do I engage the people who are going to work with me day in, day out to like make this bigger than myself?
Right. Love that. Awesome. Erin, this has been so wonderful. And I know we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have a question for Erin, please make sure to drop it in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get to as many as possible. So we have a question here. Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to like, finding the balance for ensuring teams are kind of like aligned with strategic goals while
Mhm.
still fostering that sense of ownership. So this person is asking, do you find sharing finances or any major decision, I assume with your team, opens things
Mhm.
up to too many opinions, too many cooks in the kitchen, pun intended? Like, do your employees always want consensus when decisions are made? What's kind of the balance there in terms of like management and team motivation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this person's question is a great one. And realistically, whenever we have had, issues with staff, it definitely leans more towards there's like too much interest, too much, maybe even like bordering on a sense of entitlement. So I do think that it can become challenging. I think figuring out this collective success framework was very, very helpful. The way I personally run things, you can decide to make decisions in all sorts of ways. This person asked in their question if people were wanting consensus. I did not operate with consensus. We operated like in quite, a normal, traditional, regular hierarchical structure, but with a lot of input and a lot of conversation. And I think, we tried to have still leaders of different, areas get to make the final call, but not without those conversations and not without being able to justify it through the framework of collective success. And I do find that even when people didn't agree, there was still usually a respect for why the decision was made. And I think when people can participate in it in a meaningful way, even if it doesn't go their way, if they feel like they've truly been listened to and they've been part of a process where they've been respected, that you'll have a good outcome anyhow.
Super helpful. Wonderful. Awesome. We have another question here. Um, and I think this is specifically on kind of that collaboration piece. This person says, I'm a startup founder and I would like to, find the balance between collaborating with my team in a way that empowers them, yet still allows me to steer the ship in the direction I know it needs to go. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they should definitely pick up a copy of my book. Not to this most like self-serving answer, but really, truly, I think that was my goal. Like I did want something that worked, which to be honest, often needs someone who at the end of the day is willing to make the call and sort of be on the hook if it doesn't work out, right? But I did really want people to feel like they really had a say and a real sense of ownership. And so yeah, I think using that collective success framework, like having lots of, touch points to have impact. But, we didn't talk about it so much in this interview up to this point, but we also would do some really interesting stuff with, employee like discipline and things like that, that I thought was really helpful. Which anyway, I'm happy to talk about separately. But I guess to answer this person's question, I think it is possible to have a balance of, like input, but also being able to like actually move the ball forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. I love that it kind of goes back to that collective success because it really is so true across industries and across business stage. So wonderful. Awesome. Keep posting those questions, folks. Awesome. We have another question here. This person is wondering, how do you kind of handle, when team, I think this is kind of like a conflict resolution question. So,
Mhm.
team members that really excel in the job but struggle when it comes to giving feedback that to help improve or set them on a trajectory for growth opportunities within the business. Uh,
Mhm.
I guess kind of your from your experience, your thoughts on kind of handling some of those difficult team dynamic conversations.
Yeah, I do think it can be tough. Everyone is, different in terms of how their abilities to receive feedback in a way that is, productive versus defensive. Um, I can say that for one thing that you can do certainly is model it, like I think be open to feedback yourself and model what it means to be receptive to it and to do something about it. Because I think it sets the example that that's the expectation. But I also think, frankly, giving people more opportunities to do that, frequent opportunities is important. And we would also teach, growth mindset. Like I think any kind of behavior that you want people to display, you cannot just say like this is my expectation. You have to actually like teach for it and train for it. So we would be like, hey, feedback is not criticism, it is an opportunity. And so this is our expectation. So when you get this kind of feedback, what should you do? When you get this, what should you do? And when they're calm and it's not personal, train them as to what you expect that conversation to look like. So that way, when it actually happens, they know okay, I'm expected to accept this feedback and actually do something about it versus like fight back or whatever else might be, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a great mindset and something that all of entrepreneurs to some degree are kind of consistently working towards, kind of in their as they strive to really build that founder confidence, as especially as leaders of their business.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Awesome. We have another question. And I think this is really interesting, especially for those businesses that have maybe been around for a couple years. From your experience as your business grew, were there any key kind or pivotal moments that forced you to kind of reconsider or redefine or reinforce those core values of the business, whether it be to your customers or your team members, and how can entrepreneurs just kind of ensure that the values that they establish for their business are really um you know are kind of able to evolve as the with
Mhm.
the business as the business grows.
Yeah, well, I think one thing to remember is I do think part of the natural evolution of a lot of businesses is frankly that sometimes the people who are right for one stage of a business are not always right for the next. So sometimes if you're really struggling to evolve, it's actually because your business might have reached a point that maybe wasn't the right one for the folks who are there, like the folks who some people have been with Homeroom basically the whole time it's been open, but that's quite a rare experience. And more likely is that the folks who maybe are really, really great at startups are a little bit less good at when things become like more mature. Because, it makes sense. The things that allowed them to be successful when everything was crazy and you're figuring it out and you're iterating constantly is going to be very different than, when you need everyone to like, follow some more structure and procedure because maybe that team is now a lot larger and so it won't work to just be off wearing 10 different hats and iterating all the time, right? So
Right.
I'd say that's one, and I think that can be really hard for people because sometimes you just have a really deep personal connection with team members who've been through a lot together. But I would say if you're struggling, that can often be part of why.
Right. And I think that kind of goes back to like what you were saying of, the when you're kind of looking at team members for growth opportunities, you're looking at them in terms of their alignment with those core values.
Hmm.
It's like a priority. So
Hmm.
I feel like that really lends itself well to that idea that you were just describing. Um, Wonderful. Awesome. We have another question here. So I think, this is really interesting of, kind of for an existing business who may have a company culture established that isn't quite working. Maybe they've identified, what's not working. Um, you know, Is it kind of, I think this person is asking, when you're kind of looking to make a pivot or adjust kind of that leadership style, when it's not working, is it kind of an overnight flip? How do you kind of, or is it like a slow drip that you would kind of slowly implement across your team and then like across communications to your customers? I think this person is kind of asking like, where do you find the balance between kind of making like a very quick pivot or slowly adjusting your communication strategy there.
Hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I would say obviously it sort of depends on what you're changing, but I think some good advice overall would be so like I had this experience that I'm sure many entrepreneurs have had of like I needed to focus more as my company grew from working in the business where I was the one like often on the floor with people and providing service to working on the business where I was just going to focus on strategy and growth and problem solving and developing other leaders versus being the on the floor leader myself. And that's a big pivot. Just what was working before was not going to clearly work to get us to sort of the next place. It also just wasn't the right thing for me personally anymore, right? So I think sometimes people make changes and they're not incredibly clear about why or where they're headed or what's in it for other people, right? And so, I did sit down my whole team and I was like, hey, I've previously been like a player on the field with you. I am transitioning into a coaching role. And just like coaches do not also play on the field because they will have then an inability to see the big picture, I cannot be out there working with you on the line or doing,
Yeah.
shifts because I won't be able to see the whole field and I won't be able to help you. And so, this is going to benefit the company in this and that way. Here's how it's going to change your job. Here's how it's going to change my job. Here's the stuff I'm no longer doing. Here's the stuff I'm going to start doing. Here's the stuff you're going to no longer do. Here's the stuff we're going to start doing. I think just like giving people the lay of the land and really respecting their like intelligence, their concerns, and charting a course forward and a vision for what success looks like, so that they can really, rally behind you to get there together.
Yeah, and I think that totally goes back to, that idea of like communication and really allowing, folks to still, on your team to be themselves, but still giving them that direction of like, okay, this is what you can expect going
Mhm.
forward with these changes. And I think that provides like a lot, relieves a lot of
Yeah,
potential anxieties. So it's
totally.
super helpful. Wonderful. We have an entrepreneur here who seems to be in the restaurant business. They say the restaurant business can be all-consuming, especially when you only have one location and the owner is also the manager. What
Mhm.
advice do you have for restaurateurs with one location to make the job sustainable on a personal level? And I guess I would add that to that, for this person, kind of with the limited knowledge that we have, any advice to, just set them on a pathway for sustainable growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice would be anything that you don't, still, even though you might, be small or just with one location, like anything that you don't either need to do or derive a lot of joy from doing and like energy from doing, like try to delegate even within a small business. I think it's like really common for small business owners to wear a number of hats and in doing so exhaust themselves, be unable to work on the business as well as in the business. And, and often, and sometimes you're so financially constrained that there's no other choice. But a lot of times that's not true. And it's more a personal fear of letting go that keeps people holding on to things that maybe they shouldn't be holding on to. So I would say to the degree it's possible to delegate, to trust people, to start training people, to like really only do the stuff that is special and unique to you, that adds the most value to the business. Um, Start getting rid of everything else. That's what I'd say.
Wonderful. Awesome. Let's see. Couple more minutes. If you have any questions, make sure to drop it in there. All right. So I think this is kind of general, but this person is kind of asking, if there were ever moments in from your entrepreneurial journey where you had to like make a tough decision to kind of align your operations with the kind of like feminist, people-centered culture that you were establishing. So, just any thoughts on what that experience looked like and just best practices for making tough decisions, that not everyone may agree with.
Yeah, so I mean, I did have a really a tough moment in the business. Many years in, I learned from my team that a lot of the women were actually experiencing harassment, like sexual harassment from customers.
Yeah.
And so I was quite shocked to learn of this. I was really surprised because I thought had created this really beautiful work culture, but we did end up again, like we would approach sort of any problem, like collaborating with the team on a solution and really trying to involve people who are most affected and trying to solve the problem versus just leaving it, up to, leaders or managers. And it was really successful. I mean, we had like a lot of trial and error, but we ended up coming up with a system that I wrote a viral Washington Post piece about. I was invited to Washington to testify in front of the EEOC about it. It became like a best practice. It's now used by bars and restaurants all around the world. So very, very successful. And it made a sea change in our restaurant. And it was a scary moment because, it's different to collaborate on ideas when it's about like, what holiday are you going to be open? It's very different to collaborate on ideas for how to make people safe. And if you're wrong, it's pretty high stakes failure. So yeah, I think that was a thorny one, but I think we came out of it in a much better place than where we started.
Yeah, feel like that's such a powerful example, and it kind of shows that like even like the collective success can benefit not just like your team, but it can kind of drive positive industry change.
Hmm.
So that's just so incredible, and thank you so much for sharing that. Erin, this has been such a wonderful conversation. If you had one key takeaway or piece of wisdom from your journey that you wanted to leave with the audience, what would that be?
I'd say, stay in touch with what brings you energy and, makes you excited and keep following that. Because I think at heart, that's been at the root of all my own personal success as well as just satisfaction. So I'd say do that.
Wonderful. Awesome. Erin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this conversation, share these insights, and just set such a great overview of this kind of uh, feminist, people-driven leadership style that businesses of, across industries can aspire to. So on behalf of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here in attendance today, we are just so thankful that you joined us.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us for upcoming webinars, which you can view using the links that are going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.